The gruesome truth the Ripper murders left behind. In 1888, a new kind of terror took over London's East End. It was insane. It moved through the fog, did some of the most brutal things you can imagine, and then just vanished. This was so much more than just a few crimes. This was a phenomenon that would expose the dark, disgusting secrets of a global empire and create a ghost that still haunts us over 100 years later. This killer was never caught, and his identity is still one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in the history of crime. He was only known by one creepy, taunting name, Jack the Ripper. But before the legend, 5 real women were slaughtered. To understand the myth, we have to face the gruesome truth of what they went through. This is the story of the canonical 5 and how their killer changed the world forever. The world of Whitechapel and the first killings. Okay, so picture this. You're in Whitechapel, a district in London's East End, and it is basically synonymous with poverty and misery. It was a maze of dark streets, disgusting courtyards, and packed lodging houses where thousands of people were living in insane poverty. For many women, the only way to survive was to sell their bodies. They were vulnerable, forgotten by society, and they became the killer's chosen targets. The terror kicked off on August 31st, 1888. The body of a 43-year-old woman named Mary Ann Nichols, or Polly, was found in a dark street. Polly was a mother whose life had been destroyed by a bad marriage and alcohol, which pushed her into workhouses and onto the streets. The night she was murdered, she was turned away from her lodging house because she didn't have the 4 pence for a bed. Her last known words were that she'd get her bed money on the street. She never came back. Her throat had been cut so deep her head was almost completely severed, and her stomach had been slashed open with multiple savage cuts. Just over a week later, on September 8th, the killer did it again. In a backyard, the body of Annie Chapman was discovered. Annie, who was 47, had also fallen into poverty and heavy drinking after her husband died. She was known as a nice but tragic person. The brutality of her murder showed a horrifying escalation. Like Polly, her throat was cut. But this time, the mutilations were way worse. Her abdomen was sliced wide open, and her uterus had been surgically removed and taken from the crime scene. The skill of the removal immediately made everyone think the killer had to have some kind of medical or surgical training. The double event and the grand finale of horror. As public fear exploded into total panic, the killer just got bolder. In the early morning of September 30th, he would commit not 1, but 2 murders in what became known as the double event. The first victim that night was Elizabeth Stride. She was a 44-year-old Swedish immigrant found in a place called Dutfield's Yard. She had 1 clean slash across her neck that cut an artery, but unlike the other victims, her body wasn't mutilated. It's believed the killer was interrupted just moments after the murder by a guy entering the yard with a cart. This likely forced him to run before he could finish his twisted ritual. But he wasn't done for the night, not even close. Less than an hour later and a short walk away, he found his next victim, Catherine Eddowes. Catherine was 46 and barely got by selling cheap poems and doing odd jobs. That night she was in jail for being drunk in public, but was released around 1 a.m., at the exact same time the killer was being interrupted a mile away. Her mutilated body was found in a corner of Mitre Square, and this time, the killer's rage was completely unleashed. Not only was her throat cut and her abdomen ripped open, but her left kidney and a large piece of her uterus had been taken. Her face was also horrifically disfigured. The double event sent a massive wave of terror through London, cementing the idea that a single, monstrous person was responsible. The Autumn of Terror hit its insane peak on November 9th, 1888. The final official victim was Mary Jane Kelly. At just 25, she was the youngest. Unlike the others, she was murdered indoors in her tiny room at 13 Miller's Court. This privacy gave the killer a terrifying amount of time. What the police found behind that locked door is pure nightmare fuel. Mary Kelly's body was mutilated beyond all recognition. Her face was hacked off, and her organs and chunks of her flesh were laid out around the room. Her heart was missing. The killer had even burned things in the fireplace, apparently to get enough light to perform the insane dissection. It was an act of such extreme brutality it seemed impossible for a human to do. And then, after the horror of Miller's Court, the killings just stopped. The birth of a legend. The murders themselves were horrific, but the legend of Jack the Ripper was born in the media. A boom in cheap, sensational newspapers meant the story of the Whitechapel murderer was sent to hundreds of thousands of readers every single day. Papers like the Illustrated Police News published insane drawings of the crime scenes and victims, creating a mix of fear and dark curiosity. The killer got his infamous name when a London news agency got a letter, dated September 25th, claiming to be from the murderer himself. Written in red ink, it mocked the police for being clueless and was signed with the chilling nickname, Jack the Ripper. This was followed by the Saucy Jackie postcard and the From Hell letter. That last one was sent to the leader of a local watch group, and it came with half a human kidney, which he claimed belonged to Catherine Eddowes. The crazy part is, many top police officers thought the letters were a total hoax made up by journalists to sell more papers, but the name stuck. The press had turned an anonymous killer into a monster celebrity, a phantom who was not just stalking London, but the entire world's imagination. Meanwhile, the police investigation was an absolute failure. Scotland Yard was dealing with a type of criminal they had never seen before, and they were crippled because they didn't have modern forensic techniques. Things we use all the time today, like fingerprinting and DNA testing, didn't exist as tools. To make things even worse, a rivalry between the two police forces in charge of the area messed up the investigation, with one officer even ordering crucial evidence to be washed away to stop a riot. The police were flooded with over 300 letters from people claiming to be the Ripper and were hounded by an angry public, all while the real murderer slipped away like a ghost. So who was this guy? The theories about the Ripper's identity are as fascinating as the case itself, and we're about to explore the absolute craziest ones. If you're as obsessed with this deep dive into history's most insane cold case as we are, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our future investigations. Let us know in the comments if you want to see more stories about Jack the Ripper. The Rogues Gallery of Suspects. For over 100 years, a whole industry of amateur and pro detectives called Ripperologists has studied this case, naming over 100 different suspects. The list is long and wild, with some suspects seeming plausible and others being completely nuts. One of the biggest suspects, who was actually named in a police memo at the time, was Aaron Kosminski. He was a Polish immigrant who worked as a hairdresser in Whitechapel and had severe mental illness. He was put in an asylum shortly after the murders stopped and actually matched a witness's description. More recently, a super controversial DNA analysis of a shawl said to belong to Catherine Eddowes has been claimed to point to Kosminski, but the science is still being fiercely debated. Another major suspect, and a favorite of the lead investigator, Inspector Frederick Aberline, was a guy named George Chapman. He was another Polish immigrant who was eventually executed in 1903 for poisoning 3 of his wives. Aberline believed Chapman was the Ripper until the day he died, but many still ask if a killer would dramatically change his method from brutal mutilation to poison. Other notable suspects include Montague John Druitt, a lawyer and school teacher whose body was found in the River Thames right after the last murder, which led his own family to suspect him. And then you have the really sensational theories, which have accused everyone from a violent American conman to a member of the royal family, Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson. Every theory has its believers and its haters, but not a single one has ever been proven. The Ripper remains a man with 100 faces, but no face at all. The Ripper's enduring legacy. The murders stopped just as suddenly as they began, and to this day, nobody knows why. Maybe the killer died, was arrested for something else, or just decided he was done. What is certain is the legacy he left behind. The gruesome truth of the murders did more than just create a legend. They forced people to wake up. The insane media spotlight on the killings dragged the horrific living conditions of London's East End out into the open for a shocked public to see. Philanthropists and social reformers used the public outrage to demand change. In the years after the Autumn of Terror, slums were cleared, and streets that were once dangerously dark were finally lit. It's a crazy irony that the actions of a monster indirectly helped improve the lives of the very people he targeted. Jack the Ripper wasn't the first serial killer, but he was the first to become a global media phenomenon. He is still a massive figure in pop culture, a symbol of the darkness that can hide just under the surface of society. The story lives on, not just because it's an amazing unsolved mystery, but because it is a chilling reminder of the 5 women, Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane, whose tragic deaths created a legend that will never die.